He wasn't supposed to be in the NHL. Just a few weeks earlier, he was barely known, even in his own locker room. Most fans couldn't pick him out of a lineup, but then something unbelievable happened. This quiet third-string goalie stepped onto the ice and changed everything. He didn't just play well, he became unbeatable. Fans started throwing burgers onto the ice, people wore masks of his face, and the Ottawa Senators, a team that was almost out of the playoff race, suddenly couldn't lose. This is the story of Andrew Hammond, and the craziest month in NHL history. Before the run began, no one thought much of Hammond. He was just there, in case the regular goalies got hurt, a backup to the backup. He hadn't started a single NHL game. He was 27 years old with no real buzz around his name. Even he wasn't sure how long he'd stick around. That's how low the expectations were. If he didn't perform, this chance might have been his last. But it wasn't just Hammond who was in trouble. The Ottawa Senators were collapsing, their top goalies were injured, their playoff hopes fading, and the fan base was losing hope fast. The team needed a miracle just to stay alive, and somehow it came from a guy nobody believed in. In one of the most unlikely runs the league has ever seen, Hammond didn't just hold the line, he turned into a wall. Every game felt like a must-win. Every save added to the magic. And the city of Ottawa rallied behind the most unexpected hero the NHL had seen in years. What followed was a stretch of hockey so shocking, so impossible, that it didn't even feel real. And for a brief moment, it felt like nothing could stop the Hamburglar. He didn't grow up as a top prospect. He wasn't one of those kids people talked about in scouting circles or projected as a future NHL star. In fact, for most of his early career, Hammond was just trying to find a team that believed in him at all. He started in British Columbia, playing junior hockey for the Westside Warriors of the BCHL, a league that doesn't get as much attention as the big junior leagues like the WHLs. He was good, but not the kind of goalie who had scouts flying out to see him. He wasn't flashy. He didn't dominate. He was just steady. And sometimes, steady doesn't get you noticed. Even so, he kept working. After his time in the BCHL, he earned a spot with Bowling Green State University in the NCAA. For Hammond, it was a huge step forward. His first real chance to prove himself against tougher competition. But the team was struggling. Bowling Green was far from a powerhouse, and Hammond was thrown into the fire night after night. He faced a ton of shots, sometimes he played well, and still lost because the team in front of him wasn't great. Over his 4 seasons at Bowling Green, he posted a goals against average that hovered around 3. He lost more games than he won. His final college record, 30 wins, 68 losses, and 13 ties. Those numbers don't scream future NHL goalie, and that's exactly how teams looked at it. No one drafted him. Not one NHL team called his name. At this point, a lot of players give up. They move on with their lives. But Hammond wasn't ready to quit. Not yet. He signed a minor league deal and joined the Binghamton Senators in the AHL, Ottawa's farm team. It was a chance. Not a big one, but a chance. And for Hammond, that was enough. His first full season in the AHL was okay. He showed flashes of strong play, but also struggled with consistency. One night, he'd look unbeatable. The next, the puck would seem to find its way through him again and again. His save percentage hovered in the low 900s. Decent, but not eye-catching. His goals against average was over 2.8, which again doesn't jump off the page. There were times where it felt like he was stuck in neutral. No call-ups, no buzz, just the daily grind of minor league hockey, long bus rides, half-full arenas, and the constant pressure of knowing that one bad week could cost you your job. In an interview years later, Hammond admitted that he started to doubt himself during those years. He wondered if the NHL would ever happen. He wasn't a young prospect anymore. He wasn't getting called up, and every season that passed made the dream feel farther away. He didn't come from a big hockey family. There weren't connections or hype helping him move up. Everything had to be earned. And when you're in the minors long enough, with no sign of promotion, you start to think about other careers, about life after hockey, about how much longer you can hang on. But Hammond kept showing up. He stayed late at practice, he put in extra work in the gym, and even when his name wasn't being mentioned, he stayed ready, just in case. He didn't complain, didn't make noise, he just quietly waited for a door to open. He had every reason to give up. His numbers weren't elite, he wasn't highly paid, and no one was pushing for him to be promoted. But Hammond believed there was something more in him, something people hadn't seen yet. And as fate would have it, the NHL door finally opened. Not because he forced it open, but because Ottawa's goalie depth collapsed. The team was desperate, and suddenly, Andrew Hammond, the goalie nobody ever talked about, was their only option. He wasn't supposed to be ready, but he was. The 2014-15 season wasn't going well for the Ottawa Senators. They were drifting in the standings, barely holding on to playoff hopes. The team had talent, but things just weren't clicking. Then, in the middle of all that, disaster struck. Both of their main goalies went down. First, it was Craig Anderson. He was the team's veteran starter, the guy who had carried them for years. When he got hurt, it was a huge blow, but Ottawa still had Robin Lehner, their young and promising backup. Maybe he could hold things together, but then Lehner got injured too. It happened in a strange, scary collision with teammate Clark MacArthur during a game against Carolina. Both players went down. MacArthur was shaken up, but Lehner took the worst of it. He had to leave the game with a concussion, and suddenly, Ottawa had no healthy NHL goalies. They were in a full-blown goalie crisis. And that's when the call came. Andrew Hammond was in the AHL, quietly minding his business in Binghamton. He was putting in the work, playing backup minutes, and trying to stay ready, just in case. On February 16, 2015, the just in case became real. He got the call. You're going up. It wasn't a big celebration. There was no fanfare. Hammond packed his gear and joined the Senators as an emergency option. He wasn't even supposed to start. He was just insurance, a guy to sit on the bench while the team figured out what to do. He wasn't a prospect. He wasn't a part of the team's long-term plan. In the eyes of most people, he was just a stopgap, a placeholder, someone to wear the jersey and keep the seat warm until Anderson or Lehner got healthy. Even Hammond didn't know what to expect. He later admitted that he didn't think he'd actually get into a game. In his mind, he was just there to help the team stay afloat for a few days. But then something unexpected happened. Ottawa ran out of options completely, and on February 18th, just 2 days after being called up, Andrew Hammond was told he'd be starting against the Montreal Canadiens. The Montreal Canadiens, one of the league's biggest teams, a rivalry game, and Hammond's first NHL start. There wasn't much time to think. Hammond had never started an NHL game before. He hadn't even played a full preseason game. He was 27 years old, wearing borrowed pads and walking into a Canadian rivalry game with everything on the line. And yet, somehow, he wasn't panicking. Teammates later said that he was quiet, calm, and focused. No big speeches, no nerves showing. He just quietly went through his warm-ups and got ready like it was a normal day. But deep down, Hammond knew this wasn't a normal. This was the biggest moment of his life. Most players dream of their first NHL start for years. They picture the lights, the anthem, the roar of the crowd. For Hammond, it came with pressure. If he blew it, that might be the end of his NHL story. He'd waited his whole life for this moment, and now he had just one game to prove he belonged. And then, he did it. Against all odds, against a strong Canadiens team, Andrew Hammond played like he'd been doing this for years. He stopped 42 shots. He didn't just survive, he thrived. The Senators won the game 4-2, and suddenly, people started asking, who is this guy? It was just one win, but something felt different. There was a calmness in Hammond's game. He wasn't flashy. He didn't flop around or make wild saves. He was just solid, quiet, reliable. And for a team that had been spiraling, that kind of presence in net was exactly what they needed. No one knew it yet, but that night in Montreal was the start of something special. Andrew Hammond wasn't just filling in anymore. He was about to go on one of the most unexpected runs in NHL history. Andrew Hammond's first NHL start was surprising, but his next few games, that's when things started getting weird, in the best way possible. After beating Montreal in his debut, most people thought it was just a nice story, a feel-good moment, a one-and-done kind of thing. Backup goalies win games sometimes, no big deal. But then came his second start, this time against the Florida Panthers. And guess what? Another win. Hammond stopped 21 shots, and the Senators won again. Now people were raising their eyebrows. Was this guy actually good? Or was this just some early luck? Then came Game 3 against the Tampa Bay Lightning, one of the top offensive teams in the league. And Hammond shut them out. A perfect game. He stopped all 26 shots and won 3-0. That's when it officially became something more than a fluke. 3 straight wins, a shutout, and an Ottawa team that suddenly looked alive. Reporters started asking about him in post-game interviews. His teammates started joking about how calm he was. He still wasn't saying much, still going about his routine like none of it was strange. But everyone could feel it. Something special was happening. From there, it just kept going. Over the next few weeks, Hammond didn't just win. He carried the Senators. One of his biggest performances came on March 4th against the Winnipeg Jets. He faced 35 shots, made huge saves late in the third, and helped secure a 3-1 win. The Jets were pushing hard, but Hammond didn't crack. He was reading plays well, tracking the puck, and making it look easy. Then came another huge game, this time against the Los Angeles Kings, the defending Stanley Cup champions. They were big, fast, and physical, the kind of team that usually crushes inexperienced goalies. But Hammond stood tall. He faced 35 shots again, stopped all of them, and earned his second NHL shutout. That game changed everything. You could see it on the bench, in the locker room, and even in the stands. The Senators were a different team now. They weren't hanging their heads or waiting to lose. They were battling, skating harder, taking more chances. Why? Because they believed in the guy behind them. They knew Hammond had their backs. And it wasn't just about the results, it was how he was doing it. Hammond wasn't an aggressive goalie. He wasn't flashy or wild in the crease. Instead, he played a very calm, positional style. He stayed square to his shooters, controlled rebounds well, and used his glove hand to steal more than a few sure goals. He didn't panic under pressure. When the puck bounced around in front of him, he stayed still, tracked it carefully, and made the save. He wasn't stealing games by diving all over the place. He was making tough saves look routine. And for a team that had been full of chaos earlier in the season, that kind of stability changed everything. The fans noticed too, and they loved it. Around this time, people started calling him the Hamburglar. It was a nickname from his college days that suddenly caught fire. Why? Because he was stealing wins the way the McDonald's cartoon burglars stole hamburgers. It was perfect. Fans started showing up with homemade Hamburglar masks. People tossed actual hamburgers onto the ice after games. One fan even threw a McDonald's cheeseburger with Hammond's face on it, taped to the wrapper. It didn't take long for McDonald's to get involved. A local franchise owner gave him a lifetime supply of burgers. No joke. The Hamburglar legend was growing fast. Meanwhile, the national media started to take notice. TSN ran full segments about him. Sportsnet couldn't stop talking about the Senators' sudden playoff push. ESPN mentioned Hammond's streak during their highlight reels, even though they don't cover hockey much. Twitter lit up with reactions. NHL players, coaches, analysts, everyone was in disbelief. Because this wasn't supposed to happen. Hammond wasn't just winning games, he was dominating. He became the first goalie in NHL history to allow 2 goals or fewer in his first 12 career starts. His save percentage during the run was above .940. His goals against average dropped to near 1.5, and he was facing 30, sometimes 40 plus shots per game night after night. At one point, his record stood at 14 wins, 0 losses, and 1 overtime loss in his first 15 starts. Think about that. 15 starts, 14 wins, from a goalie who just weeks earlier had never started a game in the NHL. The hockey world hadn't seen anything like it in years. People started comparing him to Ken Dryden, the Canadiens legend who took over in 1971 and won a Stanley Cup after just 6 regular season games. Others mentioned Cam Ward in 2006 or Jordan Binnington in 2019, all goalies who came out of nowhere and turned into playoff heroes. But even among those names, Hammond's streak was different because it wasn't just a few great games, it was a month and a half of top-level hockey. With playoff pressure on a team that had no business climbing the standings, it felt like something out of a movie. And through all of it, Hammond stayed the same. Calm, quiet, focused. He didn't talk big in interviews. He gave credit to his teammates. He didn't care about attention or headlines. He just wanted to win games and do his job. But even he had to admit, it didn't feel real. In one interview, he said, "It's kind of surreal to be honest. You try not to think too much. You just take it one day at a time. But yeah, it's been crazy." And it was. By the end of March, Andrew Hammond had turned the Ottawa Senators from a team with no hope into one of the hottest clubs in the NHL. Fans believed. Players believed. And whether you were watching from the arena or your couch, you couldn't look away. This was the Hamburglar Run, and it was just getting started. By mid-March, what Andrew Hammond and the Ottawa Senators were doing didn't seem possible, but it was happening right in front of everyone's eyes. At one point earlier in the season, the Senators were 14 points out of a playoff spot. In the NHL, that kind of gap is usually a death sentence. Teams don't make that up. The odds were less than 5%, but game by game, save by save, Hammond kept winning. And with each win, Ottawa kept climbing. Every night started to feel like a playoff game. There was no room for error. One loss could end the dream. One bad bounce could bring it all crashing down. But the Senators kept surviving, and then they started thriving. They were winning games they shouldn't, beating teams above them in the standings, taking points from playoff locks. And it wasn't just about Hammond anymore. The entire team had bought in. Rookie forwards were scoring, veterans were blocking shots. Everyone was doing the little things. The kind of effort you only see from a group that believes they're part of something special. With each game, the crowd got louder. The arena started to buzz before puck drop. It wasn't just about playoff hopes anymore. It was about pride, belief, and writing one of the craziest comeback stories in NHL history. As the calendar flipped to April, Ottawa had gone from bottom feeders to serious contenders. But they still had to finish the job. The pressure was building, and the final stretch was brutal. Almost every team they faced was either playoff bound or fighting for their own spot. That made every game a war. A mistake could end it. A big save could keep the season alive. And somehow, Hammond just kept making those saves. One of the most emotional wins came on April 7th against the Pittsburgh Penguins. It was a must-win, plain and simple. Ottawa fell behind 3-0 early. The dream looked over, but the team clawed back and tied it 3-3. Then in overtime, Mark Stone scored the winner. The bench exploded. Hammond made 34 saves that night, and the Senators lived to fight another day. 2 games later, it all came down to the season finale against the Philadelphia Flyers. One more win, that's all they needed to make the playoffs. The game started tight. Ottawa scored first, but Philly pushed back hard. It was fast, physical. Every rush felt dangerous. Every whistle felt like a pause in something historic. And once again, Hammond was there. He made 34 saves that night. Calm, steady, reliable, just like he'd been for nearly 2 months. The Senators won 3-1, and with that, they completed one of the most unbelievable runs the NHL had ever seen. They made the playoffs. A team that had been left for dead. A goalie no one believed in. A 14-point deficit erased. In just 31 games, Andrew Hammond posted a 21-2 record. Think about that. 20 wins, 1 loss, 2 overtime losses. It's the kind of stat line that doesn't even sound real. But it was. When the final horn sounded, the bench cleared. Players flew toward Hammond, helmets off, gloves in the air. They mobbed him in the crease, laughing and yelling. It wasn't just a celebration, it was a release. A wave of emotion after weeks of pressure, tension, and uncertainty. Inside the locker room, players couldn't stop smiling. Reporters swarmed around Hammond trying to capture the moment, but he stayed true to form, quiet, humble, and focused on the team. "It's been an unbelievable ride," he said. "I'm just thankful to be part of it." Broadcasters were already calling it one of the most incredible stories in modern NHL memory. TSN's panel said, "You couldn't script it better." Sportsnet called it pure magic. On Twitter, fans from across the league were posting pictures of hamburgers and calling Hammond the hero of the season. But no one felt it more than the people of Ottawa. For a city that had watched its team struggle all year, this run meant everything. It wasn't just about hockey, it was about hope, about the idea that no matter how far you fall, it's never too late to climb back. And all of it came from a guy who was never supposed to get the chance. The Hamburglar had saved the season, and the Senators were heading to the playoffs. After everything Andrew Hammond had done, after 20 wins in 23 games, after saving a broken season, after carrying the Senators into the playoffs, he finally had a shot to prove himself on the biggest stage. The 2015 Stanley Cup playoffs. Round 1, the Ottawa Senators versus the Montreal Canadiens. It was a high-pressure matchup. Montreal was one of the best teams in the league that season. Their goalie, Carey Price, had just finished a historic year and would go on to win the Hart Trophy as the league's MVP. The odds weren't in Ottawa's favor, but that didn't matter to the fans. As far as they were concerned, anything was possible. After all, they had Hammond. But the magic for the first time in weeks started to slip. In Game 1, Hammond gave up 4 goals on just 39 shots. Not terrible, but not what fans had come to expect from him. The Senators lost 4-3. Then in Game 2, the pressure got heavier. Montreal played a tight defensive game, and Ottawa struggled to score. Hammond allowed 3 more goals. The Senators lost again. Suddenly, they were down 0-2 in the series. By Game 3, the team decided to make a change. Hammond was pulled, and veteran goalie Craig Anderson got the start. Just like that, the Hamburglar Run was over. Hammond never got back in the net for the rest of the series. Ottawa fought hard to push the series to 6 games, but they were eliminated. It wasn't the ending anyone wanted. For Hammond, it was a hard moment. He had done everything to get them there, but when it mattered most, he was on the bench. And from there, things only got harder. The next season, 2015-16, was supposed to be his chance to prove he could be a full-time NHL goalie, but things didn't go as planned. Right from the start, injuries became a problem. Hammond suffered a groin injury early in the year. It wasn't serious, but it kept him out just long enough to lose his rhythm. When he came back, he wasn't the same. His movements looked slower. His confidence seemed shaken. He gave up goals he wouldn't have allowed the year before. He finished the season with a 7-11-4 record, a save percentage of just .914, and a goals against average over 2.6. Decent, but not enough to take the starting job from Anderson. The team began to move on. In 2016-17, Hammond got even fewer chances. His name started falling further down the depth chart. When he did play, he looked out of sync. His body didn't move like it used to. He was dealing with more nagging injuries behind the scenes. Things that didn't make headlines, but made a huge difference in the crease. Eventually, he was sent down to the HL. It was a tough pill to swallow. Just 2 years earlier, fans were throwing burgers on the ice in his honor. Now he was back riding buses in the minors, trying to get his game back. The Senators traded him in 2017 as part of a deal with the Colorado Avalanche. A new team meant a new chance, but the same problems followed him. Hammond was mostly used as an emergency call-up. He played a couple games here and there, but never locked down a spot. Then came his short stint with the Buffalo Sabres. Again, just a few appearances. A strong game here, a rough game there. Nothing stuck. His once magical run had turned into a slow fade out of the league. But through it all, Hammond kept trying. He stayed in shape. He signed minor league deals. He worked with goalie coaches. He showed up to camps hoping for one more shot. At one point, he even joined the Minnesota Wild's taxi squad, during the pandemic-shortened season, just trying to stay close to the game. He bounced between the AHL and NHL, appearing for teams like the Montreal Canadiens and New Jersey Devils as a backup or emergency option, but he never got back to being that guy again. Some of it was physical, injuries, wear and tear, but some of it was mental too. The pressure of expectations, the memory of being that good, and the weight of not being able to reach that level again. There were reports that Hammond had dealt with hip and ankle issues, both serious problems for any goalie. And the truth is, in pro sports, once a player is labeled as a one-hit wonder, it's hard to shake that reputation. But through all of it, Hammond never complained. He handled it all with the same quiet professionalism he showed during his rise. He didn't beg for attention. He didn't talk about the pressure. He just kept working, hoping that somehow the door would open again. Eventually it didn't. In 2023, he quietly stepped away from pro hockey. No press conference, no farewell tour, just the end of a career that once burned brighter than anyone ever imagined. It wasn't the storybook finish people hoped for. But even so, what he did in that one magical stretch was more than most players ever experience. He didn't need a long prime. He had 1 month that made history, and that on its own was enough to make Andrew Hammond unforgettable. Even though Andrew Hammond's time in the spotlight was short, the way he captured the hearts of fans, especially in Ottawa, has never faded. Ask any Senators fan about the 2014-15 season, and they'll remember exactly where they were during the Hamburglar Run. It wasn't just a winning streak, it was something magical. The kind of story that felt too good to be real. A backup goalie with no NHL experience stepping in, game after game, and giving the team a miracle. It gave people hope. And even now, years later, fans still talk about it with a smile. You'll still see Hammond jerseys at games, some with his name, others with just the Hamburglar across the back. You'll see posters, custom goalie masks, and even the occasional McDonald's reference. The nickname stuck. It became part of Senators history, because for one unforgettable stretch, Andrew Hammond didn't just play well, he made people believe. It's not every day a goalie comes out of nowhere and changes everything. That's why, anytime a new netminder starts a surprise hot streak in the NHL, fans and analysts instantly ask, is this another Hamburglar Run? His name has become a measuring stick, a way to describe the impossible. It's hard to explain what that kind of influence means. Most players who make a lasting impact are superstars, guys with big contracts, highlight reels, and long careers. Hammond was different. He showed that you don't need to be a household name to create something unforgettable. You just need the right moment and the courage to grab it. For young goalies grinding in the minors, Hammond's story is fuel, proof that it doesn't matter where you start or how long it takes. All that matters is being ready when your chance finally comes. He gave hope to the late bloomers, the undrafted players, the ones nobody talks about. Because for a few amazing weeks, Andrew Hammond reminded everyone that dreams can still come true in professional sports. Years after the run, Hammond has spoken about that time in his life, and even he sometimes can't believe it happened. In interviews, he's always humble. He thanks his teammates. He credits the coaches and the fans. He doesn't brag. He doesn't act like a legend. He just talks like someone who was lucky to live out a dream and grateful for the chance. I never expected anything like that, he once said. I was just trying to make a save. I never thought it would turn into something people would remember years later, but they do remember. Because it wasn't just about wins. It was about what those wins meant. The belief they gave to a city, the joy they brought to fans who had been waiting for something to cheer about. It was about heart, determination, and rising above every expectation. That's the real legacy of the Hamburglar Run. Not the stats, though those were impressive, not even the wins, but the feeling it gave people. That moment when sports remind us why we watch in the first place. The underdog, the comeback, the surprise, the story you'll still tell 10 years later. Andrew Hammond may not be in the Hall of Fame. He may not have a long list of NHL records. But what he did in that one stretch will live forever. Because for a little while, he wasn't just a goalie. He was a symbol of hope. He didn't need a long career. He just needed one magical month. That's all it took to become a legend. When Andrew Hammond stood in the crease that first night, no one expected much. By the end of the season, fans were tossing burgers onto the ice, wearing Hamburglar masks, and chanting his name. A goalie who was barely known weeks earlier had become the heartbeat of a city and the face of one of the most unbelievable runs in NHL history. Years later, people still talk about it, not because of how long it lasted, but because of how it made them feel. Hopeful, inspired, excited. That's the beauty of sports. Sometimes, the best stories come from the most unexpected places. As Hammond once said, I was just trying to make the most of a chance. And in doing that, he gave fans a memory that will last forever. If you love this story, check out our next video on the top 10 goalies in NHL history and see where the legends stand.